Greetings, this is Bradford Townsend. Today is April 1st, and this is a Forward Research Report. This is part 2 in a series on the tax plans, national security policies, and immigration policies for the 4 leading candidates from the Republican and Democratic parties. The Democrats, Vermont Senator Bernie Sanders, and former Secretary of State and New York Senator and lawyer Hillary Rodham Clinton. Republicans, billionaire real estate developer Donald J. Trump, who resides in New York City, and the junior senator from Texas, lawyer Ted Cruz. Part 2 in the series will inform potential voters and stakeholders around the globe concerning 3 crucial issues: the tax plans of the 4 candidates, and a nonpartisan tax foundation, dynamic statistical models on the 4 candidates' tax plans. Viewers can find the website at taxfoundation.org. National security and immigration will also be briefly discussed. My apologies, as I was in error in part 1 concerning the labor participation rate. The labor participation rate is only 63%, not 68%. Today, labor market data was released by the United States Bureau of Labor Statistics. The total labor force is 158,286,000. There are 8 million unemployed. 396,000 new workers entered the labor force, and 215,000 workers found new employment. There was a deficit of 215,000 jobs, which raised the unemployment rate to 5%. Okay, let's look into the tax plans of the 4 candidates. Trade-offs is a term used in economics literature. Trade-offs are positive and negative consequences of a policy, such as raising taxes. An example: raising a tariff on imported cars, which protects automakers and generates income and jobs in the automobile industry, but as a consequence causes all consumers purchasing cars to pay more for their cars. Less competition, for which an argument can be made, reduces quality. The concept of trade-offs is pivotal to apprehend the positive and negatives of the tax plans and policies, and how of the 4 candidates would benefit you or injure you and the United States. In other words, who would be the winners and who would be the losers? First up at the batter's box is the Senator, Independent Democrat, Democratic Socialist, Bernie Sanders. Mr. Sanders is a graduate of the University of Chicago, began his career as a community civil rights organizer during the 1960s. 3 times elected mayor of Burlington, Vermont, elected to the Congress in 1990, where he served for 16 years, and then was elected to the Senate in 2006. He looks to the democratic socialist states of Scandinavia as role models, superior to the United States for their income equality and comprehensive welfare programs. Mr. Sanders advocates for an increase in the payroll tax paid for by employers of 6.2%. The senator calls for a $15 minimum wage, paid maternity leave, increases in the income tax brackets, increases in the estate tax, and eliminating most tax breaks and subsidies to corporations. Money earned from capital gains, dividends, and interest would be taxed as ordinary income rather than the much lower current tax rates. The typical worker would experience a decrease of take-home income of an estimated 13%. and the most affluent Americans, the top 1%, would see their income drop by 25%. The labor market would shrink by at least 6 million jobs. The $15 minimum wage was not factored into the dynamic statistical model. Who are the winners and losers if Mr. Sanders' tax plan was implemented? The losers would be America's low-skilled, unemployed youth with little or no job experience. The higher minimum wage and payroll taxes would retard hiring, as employers would require more productivity to profit from hiring additional staff. Additional jobs would be lost as investment in labor-saving technology such as robotics and artificial intelligence would be more economical. Thousands of jobs would be eliminated, such as grocery baggers, cashiers, greeters, waiters, and security guards. The affluent and very wealthy would pay a much higher proportion of their wealth and income. Workers fortunate to keep their jobs would be compelled to work more productively, i.e. harder and smarter. The winners are middle-aged and senior citizen workers with good work histories and experience at the lower third of the income distribution. Most low-income workers would be retained and receive a take-home pay raise, although employees would cut back on hours as much as possible. Younger women, babies, and couples would benefit from the paid maternity leave. Mr. Sanders would cover all Americans with a mandatory health insurance coverage, which would give coverage to millions not currently insured. The majority of the labor force, 70%, would experience lower incomes or unemployment under his schemes. The federal government would receive $9.8 trillion more revenue to pay the interest on the national debt. Unfortunately, most of the extra revenue would be spent on inefficient infrastructure projects. Federal projects are notorious for cost overruns. In conclusion, 3/4 of the public would experience lower income and wealth to redistribute to the poor, working poor, construction contractors, and those without health insurance. Finally, it is estimated growth would be slowed by more than a full percentage point. Let's leap over the aisle to the Republican right side of the political spectrum to analyze Senator Ted Cruz's tax plan. Senator Cruz proposes a 10% flat tax as well as a 16% value-added tax. His plan would reduce by federal revenue by $768 billion. The plan is very simple. It would raise the take-home income of the typical American by 9.8% and upper middle class by 12.8%. The capital stock of the nation would rise by a whopping 44%. The economy would grow by more than an additional percentage point a year average, creating over 1 million new jobs every year, particularly helping young job seekers. Affluent and wealthy Americans would see the largest increases in their wealth and take-home pay. The takeaway from the senator's plan that all American workers would benefit, the most successful benefiting more. Negatives: the uninsured population would not receive coverage, many would lose coverage, and women would not receive federally mandated maternity leave. The Cruz plan would benefit 90% of the American population. Next up, the former First Lady and Secretary of State, Hillary Rodham Clinton. Her tax reforms are much more modest, focusing on the affluent and estate tax. The plan proposes a 4% surcharge on those earning more than $5 million a year, and the Buffett rule, a minimum 30% tax rate for those benefiting from the carried interest provision, and deductions would be capped for brackets which are more than 28%. The plan would reduce employment by an estimated 381,000 jobs and reduce capital stock by 28%. Taxes would be raised on corporations to the amount of $11 trillion. This component would slow economic growth by 1%. The Clinton plan would reduce the national deficit significantly. This is a plan for those whose priority is reducing the national debt by creating a substantial revenue increase for the federal government, placing the burden on the affluent and wealthy. Mrs. Clinton would also cover all Americans with health insurance coverage. This method of reducing the deficit comes at the cost of growth, jobs, and wealth creation. Her plan, like Mr. Sanders', would make the job market smaller and more competitive for job seekers. The controversial Mr. Trump simplifies the tax brackets, eliminating income taxes for couples earning $50,000 a year or less. Trump's would lower taxes on businesses and corporations in an attempt to stimulate growth and incentivize companies to return operations to the United States, as well as encourage them to expand operations. Federal tax revenues would drop by a forecast $10 trillion over 10 years, while 5.5 million jobs would be created, and economic growth would accelerate by more than 1%. The typical worker would receive a 6.5% increase in take-home pay. Mr. Trump's plan is for those voters who wish to grow the economy as a strategy to get out of the nation's fiscal crisis caused by entitlement programs and accumulated debt. Immigration, legal and illegal, are to be reduced by the pledges of the two Republican candidates. A critical fact: Mexican and Central American illegal aliens are leaving at a faster pace than new arrivals due to fewer employment opportunities and stricter enforcement, particularly illegal residents convicted of crimes. Mexico has a strengthening economy propelled by foreign investment to access the NAFTA market, light regulation, and modest wages. The Republicans want to reform the visa program to attract highly educated talent and stop abuse. The Democrats, Hillary and Bernie, promised to legalize the relatively law-abiding illegal alien population and increase immigration quotas and stop abuse. I can give testimony that there are jobs such as fruit pickers and vegetable pickers that American-born workers are not willing to do for the wages offered. I can also testify that the illegals do commit crimes at rates multiples 5 times that of the 100 per thousand rates of countries such as Japan, Australia, and Norway. The illegals take casual work from youth, such as yard work and unskilled construction labor. Native-born youth crime goes up because idle hands are the devil's plaything. This issue inflames passions because the victims of crime cry out for justice and citizens are terrified of the illegals. The pro-migration politicians emphasize with the suffering poor and do not acknowledge the citizenry's legitimate concerns for their safety. We must face unpleasant realities if this intractable problem is to be solved. The next issue is national security. We will tackle this issue from the perspective of those responsible for the nation's security, the intelligence community and military-industrial complex. General Joseph Dunford, head of the Chiefs of Staff, speaking at the Center for Strategic Studies, commented, "The wear and tear of the equipment is of concern. More hours logged and mileage traveled than we allotted for, causing the deferring of upgrades to equipment." Then later on he says, "The tempo of operations demands one-to-one deployment rotation." There are 4 areas of concern: Russia, China, North Korea and Iran, and most importantly, ISIS. My impression of the armed forces is that they are tired. The experienced professionals, after a decade and a half of war, do not want another major combat zone. Heavy combat with non-Muslims and Muslims could blow back violence into the homeland. Killings and destruction will create more jihadis. Violence should be used to stop plots, not take and hold real estate. The Obama administration, in my opinion, is following their military advisors and pushing the Pentagon to be more kinetic, to be preemptive. The Democrats, Hillary and Bernie, are in line to hawkish compared to the Pentagon. Donald and Ted have the Pentagon worried and gravely concerned. Wars are unpredictable. An escalation could accelerate, risking the use of weapons of mass destruction in the developed world. These are the facts and the reality we as global citizens live in. My hope is that this video has been informative. Thanks for watching. Over and out. Bradford.